Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and the college football season is here. Week 0 is now upon us. We've got a handful of games this weekend, and we're going to break them down today on Saturday Scouting with Ben Fennell. But first, we got to welcome in the GOAT. Greg Cosell is going to join us here from Mr. Relevant to talk through the top quarterbacks entering this college football season. Greg has done a lot of work studying these guys before they go into the 2021 campaign. So we'll get his thoughts on what he saw from them on film. We're going to talk about some guys that he feels could be on the rise, who are players we're going to be talking about in the first round of next spring's draft. We're going to cover it all with Greg right here at the top of the show. Also, before we get started, make sure you go check out our mock draft episode. Myself, Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler, Mike Renner from Pro Football Focus. All 4 of us got together earlier this week. We did a 32-pick mock draft. So make sure you go check that out on the feed right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. And also, while you're there, make sure you leave us a rating, leave us a review, subscribe. Obviously, if you've got a question, we'll answer it here in an upcoming mailbag. We will do so here at the end of the show. We've got a good question from one of you at home. So make sure you go on, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. The best way to throw us your support as we get into the 2021 season. College football, like I said, is here. Before we get there, though, we're going to talk through some quarterbacks. It's time now for Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
All right, it's time for one of my favorite conversations of the year, and it's one that we try and do this time of year with Greg Cosell. We talk about some of the top quarterbacks entering this college football season. Greg, it's that time of year, football right on our doorstep.
I know we have some college football starting this weekend, and then the season really kicks off the following weekend, so it's a pretty exciting time.
No question. So, Greg, I guess I want to start this off. Obviously, we're going to spend all of our time today talking about quarterbacks, and you look back over the last few drafts, and it's funny, just going through the exercise. Zach Wilson this past year, Joe Burrow the year before, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Mitchell Trubisky, Carson Wentz. You go all the way back to 2016. All of those guys were either players that did not play the year before or significantly rose their level of play in that final year and rose to be a top 2 selection in the NFL draft. Now, as we sit here now, the only name that's really being considered universally by people on the outside, and that's all we're going off of at this point, is just media analysis, is Spencer Rattler. Only a 1-year starter, had a little bit of an up and down year last year for Oklahoma, but they're kind of banking on him, taking that next step and being that kind of player. Outside of him, is there another guy in this group that you feel like has that ability to make that jump? And we could be talking about, 8 months from now as a top 1 or top 2 pick in this draft?
Well, it's very, me, Fran. It's very hard for me to say a guy's going to be a number 1 or number 2 pick in a draft.
I'm asking you to make a very definitive statement to start this off that everybody is going to be holding you for the next 8 months. But please proceed.
Well, I think we should start then with 9th graders right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. I can't sit here and tell you that he's the 1st or 2nd pick in the draft, but there's a quarterback whose tape I watched this summer. I think I watched 6 games from his 2020 season, who I found really intriguing. And maybe he's a guy, other than lunatics like us who watch this stuff, maybe he's a guy that not a lot of people know. But I was very, very intrigued by Carson Strong from Nevada. Good sized kid, about 6'3". When I evaluated him, I made a point in my notes to say he'll be one of the more intriguing prospects in the 2022 draft if he continues to progress and improve. He's probably a more conventional pocket quarterback than many, but he does have movement. He's not a guy that just has to play from the pocket. I kind of liked his tape a lot. I thought that he had a good arm. He was aggressive throwing the football. And Fran, you and I have spoken about that for years. I've always been a believer that you need to be aggressive throwing the football. You have to have that aggressive throwing mindset. And I thought that he had the ability to change pace and speed on throws. So to me, he was a really interesting guy. You're going to hear about the smaller school, the fact that he's not playing in a Power 5 conference. We know that conversation is always had.
Right.
But I really liked Carson Strong's tape.
And what's really interesting, so a couple things stood out to me about Carson Strong. I really liked the toughness. You talked about his ability to kind of change up his pace on different throws and layer throws. I thought his touch was really impressive to all three levels, consistently accurate. He could get through progressions and make plays late in the down from that standpoint in the pocket. And what's interesting, too, just from a pure profile standpoint, when you look at the offense he plays in, Greg, it's kind of a weird marriage of an offense because you have Jay Norvell, who, we kind of know like the kind of offense that he's done over the course of his career in college. And Matt Mumme is the offensive coordinator, Hal Mumme's son, who's the grandfather of the air raid. So kind of this meshing of these two systems, you see him under center, you see him in the gun, you see him in the pistol. He runs a wide variety of pass concepts. So a really smart player. And a guy, honestly, he was one of my favorite watches as well this offseason.
Yeah, no, again, maybe people didn't think I'd mention that name based on some of the other names we're hearing a lot of going into this 2021 season. But Carson Strong intrigued me as much as any quarterback that I watched. And I think I watched 11 or 12 quarterbacks this summer who are likely to be in the draft in 2022.
All right. So we've talked about your process in the past, and we know you try not to know too much about guys when you go into that first study. You make that first maiden voyage into a guy's tape. So, but sometimes you have preconceived notions, right? When you have an idea of the buzz surrounding a player before you start watching. Has there been a guy from this quarterback group that kind of caught you off guard where you maybe had a preconceived notion going in and then you're like, wow, like this guy kind of blew me away or really surprised me with what I saw on film?
Well, I'm going to mention two names here. One in response to what you just said, because I knew nothing about him other than the fact that he put up numbers for again, not a Power 5 school last year and wasn't really well known prior. And then another guy who seems like he's been playing in college for 20 years. The first guy is Malik Willis from Liberty. And I thought his tape was really intriguing. He's an explosive dual threat quarterback. He's got a really live, strong arm. He's got high level athleticism. That in today's NFL, he could bring the design run game. He's got that second reaction dimension, which for many is so important right now. He has that whip-like delivery. He throws with power and velocity. I thought he showed a good feel for the structure and discipline of his pass game. Now, again, college pass games can be different than NFL pass games. So I'm not sitting here and telling you he would master a detailed, nuanced NFL pass game as we speak today. But I thought that he showed a good feel for his pass game. He was not a loose, reckless movement quarterback, given his athletic ability. He didn't just look to leave the pocket and run. So I thought for someone who I didn't know really anything about at all, he really caught my attention. He's just a really fun watch, especially obviously when you look at the raw tools, and even if you just start there and you say one of the most athletic quarterbacks that we've studied recently. He's really tough. Even we talked about that with Trey Lance, watching him at North Dakota State, was just how tough he was. And that toughness showed up in a number of ways. I think you could say that a lot about Malik Willis as well. And I agree. I mean, the offense that he executed, you're not saying that is a quote unquote pro style offense in the traditional sense. But he did feel like in just his first year as a starter, because again, he did not play the year before. You feel like he had decent command of what he was being asked to do. No, and my final point in my transition was that there was much to like in his tape, and with further development in 2021, he could well be in the conversation as a top pick in the 2022 draft. I mean, he has that kind of ability. He's an explosive, sudden, twitchy kid, both in the way he throws it and the way he moves. And the other guy I was just going to mention, and you may know based on what I said, it seems like he's been playing college football for 20 years, is Kenny Pickett. And Kenny Pickett won't be a top 10 pick. That's not why I'm mentioning him. But, I don't know. Did you get to watch him at all?
I have not gotten to him yet.
All right. Well, Kenny Pickett plays at Pitt, and his offensive coordinator is Mark Whipple, and you know who that is. He was with the Eagles for a year or so. He coached Ben Roethlisberger. He's made the rounds in the NFL. He's been coaching in college football for quite some time. And, Pickett's one of those guys that's mechanically sound. He's savvy. He's aware. He's smart. His pure ability, throwing ability, will not blow you away, but he's more athletic than you think. And the more I watched him, the more I just thought to myself, this guy is pretty efficient. He's decisive. He's got a pretty refined sense of timing and rhythm. And very often those guys play. I watched him and I thought of, and again, knowing nothing about the kid, so I'm not comparing my comparison now isn't about people. It's just about talent and watching tape.
Sure.
I look at him and think, okay, Kirk Cousins was a 4th-round pick and every year throws 30-plus touchdowns and only 10 interceptions. And again, I know people don't think Kirk Cousins is a top 10 quarterback, and that's not the point of saying this, but Kirk Cousins is a quality NFL starter who puts up numbers every year and obviously came in the league and didn't start right away. And I just look at Kenny Pickett and I think, you know what? I think this guy could end up being one of those kinds of guys down the road.
Interesting. I have not gotten to him yet. I do know Kenny Pickett, an Eagles fan, so he'll win some brownie points there. Some listeners to the podcast. Greg, I want to ask you about a couple of these other big names. And one of them I already mentioned, and that's Spencer Rattler, a player, just a redshirt sophomore, so still very young in terms of his football career. We didn't see too much of him up to this point. What have you seen from Spencer Rattler, and how do you evaluate him at this point in his development?
Yeah, I think people are going to make the Patrick Mahomes comparison. And whether it's valid or not, that remains to be seen. But you're dealing with a guy that's got really good arm talent. I don't think it's quite as good as Mahomes. Mahomes is truly special. But he's got that kind of higher level arm talent. He's got a compact, effortless, natural delivery, throws with really good velocity, and makes a ton of plays outside of structure, even at times when it's not needed, which was Mahomes' MO coming out and is quite honestly Mahomes' MO in the league as well. I think that much like Mahomes' 2016 tape, Rattler's 2020 tape showed a loose, undisciplined feel to his game. He broke down. He bailed out of the pocket when there was no pressure, and then he would make plays. So I think there's a lot of talent there. But I think so it comes down to how you feel about that ability and whether you believe he can do that at the next level. There were questions, as you well know, about Mahomes' ability to do that at the next level, which is why he was the 10th pick in the draft and not the first pick in the draft. But obviously, those questions have been allayed given the fact that he's obviously had a great 3 years in the league. But there's no question Rattler sort of fits that profile. But there's a lot of work to be done in terms of his refinement, his details, his nuance in playing the position. But he's got that kind of ability.
And then he's a guy too. Like I feel like as I mentioned, it was a little bit up and down for him last year. And you look in that Texas game, and that was a nice little microcosm of that, where he really struggled early. He had a couple of bad turnovers in that first half. He got benched late in the second quarter, so didn't play for a chunk of that first half. Goes in the locker room, they come back halftime. He leads them to an overtime win. And then he plays pretty well down the rest of the stretch because it was a little bit of a rough patch early. So seeing him kind of fight through that, the tools are absolutely there. I'd like to see him, as you mentioned, kind of like rein that in a little bit in terms of being able to play within a little bit better structure. But overall, I agree with you. That's going to be one of the comparisons that people make. And obviously coming from that offense, there will be a lot of those Mahomes comparisons. Let's get to another name here and another guy that is being talked about as a pretty high selection here in this draft, Greg, and that's Sam Howell from North Carolina. What is your take on Howell, and how do you see him project into the league?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got a pretty complete skill set. He's got arm talent. He can make all the throws. He's got athleticism. He's got movement. He can make plays outside of structure. I felt that he needed a lot of work with the details and nuances of the position in terms of his footwork, his balance on his drop in the pocket. Another quarterback, and you see this a lot in college, a tendency to break down. He perceived pressure and broke down quite a bit. He drifted off the midline, very often creating his own pressure. These are the details of the position, Fran, as you know, that need to be cleaned up, because if you do that in the NFL, you're just going to create your own pressure, and that's a problem. These are correctable issues. They can be coached. More experience ideally will help with them as well. I think that the talent is there, but, it's hard for me to say right now. And again, I know you're not asking me this, but it's hard for me to sit here right now and say that this guy is a definitive top 1 or 2 pick in a draft. Yep. It could end up playing out that way. We know that you mentioned Burrow, you mentioned Zach Wilson. Quarterbacks do have a tendency off their final seasons to move up in the draft because of the magnitude and importance of the position.
Yeah, and he's interesting because he's been a little bit in the limelight over the last couple of years. Obviously, they had all the skill talent a year ago at North Carolina. Yep. And last year or the year before, he made some noise in North Carolina as the true freshman starter, playing for Mac Brown in his first year back in coaching. So he's been a little bit in the limelight, whereas those other guys were a little bit under the radar. I'll be interested to see how the narrative continues to progress there with Sam Howell. Same thing can be said too. Greg, I think that this would be my pick for a guy that I feel could make that next rise, because I really like Carson Strong. I really like Matt Corral too from Ole Miss. The highs and lows. There's a little bit of a roller coaster watching Matt Corral from Ole Miss, but interested to kind of get your take on him and what you saw from him in 2020.
Well, it's interesting because I guess you like him more than I do. I watched a good number of, well, he was at Ole Miss. So yeah, I watched a good number of games. I thought he had some limitations to his game. I thought that he had some arm strength limitations, but he's an active, athletic, mobile player. He's clearly got a playmaking dimension, and that has become so important in the eyes of many. He's got second reaction ability. He ran a lot. At Ole Miss, he ran a really highly schemed, high percentage, defined pass game. Strong emphasis on quick rhythm throws off play action, RPO action, design boot action. There was hardly any straight drop back unless the down and distance demanded it. I thought that he really needed a lot of work on his timing, his rhythm from the pocket. I thought his game was built much more on movement and second reaction plays than playing efficiently from the pocket.
Yeah, he's a guy who was his first year starting in that new system there with Lane Kiffin, and the lows were, he had a couple games. I think he threw 11 picks between the LSU and Arkansas games. Obviously, though you'd like to not see that level of turning the ball over, but overall, I'm interested to see what he looks like in year 2 as a starter. Last guy I want to ask you about, Desmond Ritter from Cincinnati. Your thoughts on Ritter and how he can project to the next level. This guy viewed as one of the top seniors overall in the country.
Yeah, I watched Ritter in 2019 and I watched him in 2020. And I thought that he improved meaningfully. He's got a strong arm. He can drive the ball at the intermediate and deeper levels. He's got really good athleticism, so he can execute the design quarterback run game. He's got a playmaking dimension to make second reaction throws and runs. I think that he must continue to become more consistently precise with his ball location on the routine throws. But the flip side of that was there were many tougher throws in which he made great throws. So there's a balance there, but he clearly needs to be more consistently precise on just the throws that you have to make. He's got higher level traits. I like him more than I didn't like him. I think there's something there. Yeah. And I'm really curious in his 2021 season. I'm sure a lot of people were surprised he came back. He's got good size. He's built well. He does have a tendency to drop his arm. There's things that need to be cleaned up, but I think there's something there with this kid.
I want to ask you, you said you'd watched like 11 or 12 guys. We've talked about a handful, 6, 7 players so far today. Is there another guy that I did not ask you about that you feel is worth talking about in terms of the overall discussion with the top names at the position around the country right now?
I guess the other kid I'm intrigued to see this year is JT Daniels.
Good one. Yep.
He started 4 games at Georgia last year, the final 4. I think that he's got a good arm. I didn't think it showed up as much as it should. I think his mechanics really need to be refined. As you all know, he was a big-time recruit because I think he's from the West Coast, is he not?
I believe so, yep. He started at USC, and as a true freshman. Yep. That's
right. Yeah, he came out of Mater Dei and as a 5-star, and that's a big-time high school, obviously. I think Bryce Young is from there as well. He's got tools and traits to work with, and I think his 2021 season will go a long way in determining both his draft status and his chance for success in the NFL. But there's something there with this kid. When he planted and set and delivered with good balance and proper weight transfer, he threw the ball really well. I thought he attacked the one-on-ones. Of course, he had George Pickens, who I think, unfortunately, tore his ACL, but I thought Pickens was big time. He turned it loose when he had one-on-ones. He was aggressive. There were snaps. He looked like a very easy thrower. So again, there's something there with this kid. You talked about being anxious to see Matt Corral. I'm really anxious to see JT Daniels this year, obviously both playing in the SEC.
Yeah, and Daniels got off a little bit of a slow start. I think it was injured early on, or I forget exactly. He was not playing early, and then they really kind of settled in the back half of the year. Great, and then look, we're talking about draft eligible players. Obviously, you mentioned Bryce Young, going to be a true sophomore for Alabama. DJ Uiagalelei for Clemson, taking over for Trevor Lawrence. I mean, there are a lot of really talented quarterbacks for people to get excited about. Greg, this has been fun. I guess real quick, I have a question for you, because there's a lot of people that will compare last year's class to this year's class, and last year the 5 go in the top 15. And we know how quarterbacks, they can make that run up. People are always looking for quarterbacks. That's not even necessarily guys that are pushed up the board, but I think we're starting to see just a lot of talented young passers come out. I mean, do you feel like there's enough talent to get excited about? I guess we've talked about a handful already, but you're not necessarily down on this group overall, right?
No. Well, keep this in mind. If last year at this time, and I'm sure we spoke last year at this time, there's no way we would have mentioned Mac Jones and Zach Wilson last year at this time.
Yep.
And Zach Wilson was the number 2 pick, and Mac Jones was the number 15 pick. And Wilson is the definite starter, and Mac Jones could well be the starter. So, I think that all you can do is talk about at this point in time, traits, attributes, characteristics, what they do well, what they need to work on. When you get to the NFL, and that's why these preseason games are so hard, and they're hard for me because I'm not going to make definitive statements about these guys in preseason, is we know that the traits are there. For instance, when Zach Wilson makes that throw, which you probably saw this week, where he leaves the pocket and sticks the ball with really good velocity and accuracy on Corey Davis for 27 yards on a second reaction throw. I'm sure you saw that play, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I mean, people act like, oh my God. Well, we know from watching Zach Wilson at BYU that he has second reaction movement ability. That was not a play where you went, wow, I didn't know he could do that. It's like the week before when Justin Fields made plays with his legs, and people were like, oh my God, he made plays with his legs. Well, we knew he could do that based on his traits. When you get to the NFL, obviously traits are always good. It's better to have good traits than bad traits. But when you get to the NFL, and the reason it's hard for me in the preseason is because now you're dealing with guys executing a game plan and executing plays properly, snap after snap after snap. And we don't know that watching the preseason.
Well, it's a fun part of the process for sure. And it's an ever evolving one as the guys continue to develop. Greg, this has been great. Thanks so much for joining us here once again on the Journey to the Draft podcast. So everybody, make sure you go and subscribe to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast as well. Myself and Greg will be catching up every single week as the regular season unfolds. And we're going to be talking Eagles. We'll be talking about all of their opponents. We talk scheme, X's and O's each and every week. Greg, looking forward to things getting underway over on that show as well.
And me too, Fran. Can't wait for the regular season.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, well, great stuff there from one Greg Cosell as we now welcome in Ben Fennell to preview week 0 in the college football season. It's time for Saturday Scouting. Ben, we've got a lot of games, a handful of games here this Saturday, and it starts 1 o'clock, Nebraska at Illinois, a little Big Ten action here in week 0. And I kind of want to focus in who are the players that we need to watch. And if there's one guy above all that stands out to you in each of these matchups, I want to hear it. But let's hear it. Cornhuskers versus the Illini. Who do you like here for us to watch for next year's NFL draft?
Yeah, certainly some intriguing prospects, both sides of the ball here. I think the best of the best is center Doug Cramer from Illinois. Surprisingly veteran offensive line group, 2 returning tackles that I think have been 3-year starters. Kendrick Green will be holding down the offensive line for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Doug Cramer, he was down at O-line Masterminds over the summer, 4-year starter. This guy's competitive. He's a leader. He's really quick off the ball, heavy zone scheme out there. But I'd be remiss not to mention this Nebraska defensive tackle, Ben Still. He's in his 6th year. He's 6'5", 290. He reminds me a lot of like Adam Gaddis or Matt Ioannidis out of Temple. But Fran, you got to hear this guy's background. It's hilarious. High school wrestling, right? 2015, he wins a state title at 220. 2016, he wins a state title at 285. He wins a state title in an undefeated season and says, you know what? Let me pack on 65 pounds and win it in another weight division. And then he goes to Nebraska at like 250. So he went up weight, down weight, and now he's back up to 295. Long story short, this guy is stout. He is nasty. He's more of a run plugger in there. But Ben Still, Stille, Sorry if I'm messing up the pronunciation out there. Really fun player in the trenches.
I like it. All right. Well, and that is a big one in the Big Ten. It's rare that you see the week zeros or conference matchups, but a big one there for both those two teams. Is there, one of them's bringing in new coaching staff, Brett Bielema, now with the Illini. Scott Frost trying to get things started here with Nebraska in year 3. Let's go to the next one. All right. So that one started at 1 p.m. Saturday. This one coming up 2 p.m. on Saturday. And this one's fun. There's actually a couple of big name players here in this one. We've got Fresno State hosting UConn. Now, remember, UConn, they were the first team last year to completely opt out. Randy Edsall said, we're not playing this year. And that was over a year ago at this point. This was like early July when they opted out. So UConn playing the first game in over a year. And they've got Fresno State, who ended up playing last year in the Mountain West. But who are you looking at in this matchup?
So on the defensive side of the ball for UConn, remember, UConn didn't play any football in 2020, one of the first teams to completely opt out of their season. And that meant Travis Jones, big Travis Jones in the trenches there, went, unheralded. And this guy is 6'5", 330. And Fran, I have written down the first thing, country strong.
He is a house.
Now, what does that mean? He is huge. He has heavy hands. Listen, he plays with poor pad level, poor technique, but he gets away with it because he is so strong. He showed up on the freak list last month, Bruce Feldman's really impressive article highlighting some workouts around college football. He went from 30% body fat down to 13. Huge wingspan. I think he showed up at 360. He's now down to 330. It's crazy. These guys just shedding 30 pounds and still being 330 pounds. But he is a big house in the middle there. And then Fresno State, interesting running back on the other side. Ronnie Rivers is a really interesting dual threat back out there. One of the best pass catching backs in the country, only about 5'9", 190 or so. So doesn't have a whole lot of size, but he's an experienced player and catches the ball really well out of the backfield.
Yeah, Rivers got a little bit of buzz last year with the way that he was playing. I know he finished strong. He went back for an extra year. He was a 5th or 6th year senior out there for Fresno State. Travis
he's experienced.
Jones,
I mean, he's got 500 carries in his career. Yeah, he's been out there for a while.
Now, if I remember right, I believe his dad was a running back there at Fresno State, and he's got a bunch of those records out there. So I wonder if that played into his decision.
And, those stories, Fran, are always a asterisk because anytime you have the family lineage to a school, maybe that player, went to a school, to keep on the generations when he could have gone to a bigger school. Yeah, and I think of a guy like Alan Lazard that had offers from everybody in the Pac-12 that he could have gone to, but he went to Iowa State because that's where a lot of his family had gone. So I think there's a lot of interesting scenarios where, maybe he was a 4 or 5 star, could have gone wherever in the Power 5, but his dad played at Fresno State, so he went to Fresno State.
Yeah, and then going back over to Travis Jones, he has the profile of a guy that could be a big riser, especially if you pay attention to some of those quotes from that Freak List article about him and what he did to improve from 2019 to 2021. As you mentioned, was a little bit sloppy in terms of his technique as a junior or as a sophomore in 2019. We'll see what he looks like here this fall, and it starts on Saturday. Let's go to the next matchup here out west. Hawaii traveling to UCLA at the Rose Bowl Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Who's a player or two that you're excited to see in this matchup?
All right, so UCLA, obviously tons of players out there. Sean Ryan at left tackle is all over scouts' radar. Zach Charbonnet, running back from Michigan, going to UCLA. Interested to see him in Chip Kelly's offense. But Hawaii, we got to talk this Hawaii receiver, Calvin Turner, Fran. And listen just the names I have written down in his comp section.
Okay.
Randall Cobb, Hines Ward, Greg Ward, Lynn Bowden, Anquan Bolden, Josh Cribbs. What am I leaning towards here?
You're like all over the place because I feel like, so you talk about some pure slot receivers, you talk about some offensive weapon types, but then when you talk about Hines Ward and Anquan Bolden, I'm thinking like big, strong, really physical and competitive, tough player. So this sounds like an interesting package.
Well, these are all players that at some point played quarterback in their college career.
Quarterback, yeah, that's a good point too.
And that's what Calvin Turner did. He was a transfer from the University of Jacksonville, where he was a starting quarterback in 2018 and 2019. Comes over to Hawaii. They make him a slot receiver, a gadget back, even sometimes a wing tight end. Creative player, kickoff returner. I think he had 4 catches of 60-plus yards last year, led college football. Over 15 yards after catch per catch. Best in college football. This guy is a very, very intriguing weapon out there for the Hawaii I don't know what their mascot is, Fran. The Warriors. Yeah, help me out here. But really fun offense out there if you guys don't know anything about Hawaii. But Calvin Turner, really fun player.
If you had thrown in Antoine Randall as I would have then caught on to the quarterback trend.
I had Josh Cribbs in there, Jerick McKinnon. I don't know if maybe that would have led to the water.
Jerick McKinnon would have been a good one too. That's not a bad one. All right, let's go to the next one here. You mentioned it. UTEP traveling to New Mexico State. This one's a night game. This is Saturday, 9:30 p.m. Who's the name we need to watch here in this matchup?
New Mexico State's got an interesting offensive line. Their center is an Ole Miss transfer. Started every game at center for Ole Miss in 2019, Eli Johnson. But their left tackle, Fran, Sage Doxeter, is 6'7", 350. 6'7", 350. When you're 6'7", 350, the NFL sniffs you and takes a look at you no matter who you are. He's a really interesting kid. He's from Canada, started 35 games from 2016 to 19, but then was injured most of 19, didn't play last year. So we really haven't seen him for almost 2 years, but he's experienced. A little bit older prospect, obviously having played, 16, 17, 18, but 6'7", 350 left tackle. Look out for big number 76 off the edge.
And there's an edge rusher for UTEP, right? That some people are buzzing about.
Yeah, the kid, I decided not to go with him because his last name's a little tricky here, but his first name is Praise, edge rusher. Where's number 23? He's about 6'3", 260, 255. Really tough player out there.
All right, let's go to the last one. Saturday, 10 o'clock. We've got Southern Utah traveling to San Jose State. Who's a player you like in this one?
San Jose State actually has 2 edge rushers that are really interesting prospects. You have Cade Hall on the one side. His dad was Rhett Hall, if you remember him in the NFL, but 3-year starter, about 6'2", 260. And then the other side is Villami Fahoko, is 6'4", 263, first team All Mountain West last year, 12.5 TFLs, 6.5 sacks. Neither of these guys are really twitched up. Neither of them have a good first step. Neither of them are flexible. Neither of them are bendy. Neither of them are explosive. These guys are tough, glass-eating type of defensive ends. They play a lot of that odd front stuff. You sometimes head up with the tackle or in a 4-eye where you really have to fight and claw your way to get back to the edge out there. But San Jose State, 2 really good defensive ends out there in Fahoko and Cade Hall. And their offensive line, Jack Snyder at left tackle. It might be a darling of the offensive line prospects this year. Jack Snyder, look out for him.
Can I just say that you are a coward for not bringing up the Southern Utah linebacker, Ben? You post about him on Twitter on Wednesday night. I'm like, he's going to bring him up for the pod. No dice. You don't bring him up.
And I mentioned him on Twitter, and immediately Bruce Feldman has a nugget on him.
Yeah, well, of course.
That's why you have to throw stuff out there to the Twitterverse, because you never know who knows something or maybe has a good sentiment or story about the kid. Next thing you know, somebody says, he went to my high school. Oh, yeah, he almost won the state hurdle championship. So you start to get some more information out there. And Bruce Feldman said he was this close to making the freak list. So I don't know if you want to take it away and give an attempt at his name here.
Leave no stone unturned when it comes to La'akia Kaho'ao Hanohano Davis. I mean, at the end of the day, like one of the best linebackers in Southern Utah history.
I mean, his friends call him Davis. So it's unfortunate you guys aren't that close yet.
Well, Ben, this has been really good. We're going to be doing this every single week, obviously. Now that, college football is here. We'll be back. We got week 1 next week to break down right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. But, Ben, stay where you're at. I want to get your thoughts here in our next segment here, Draft Mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, so today on Draft Mailbag, we have a question from a listener, Valhalla24. That's a 5-star review saying, Fran, love the show. By far the best scouting show ever. Val, I really appreciate that. Thanks so much for the support. And he said, I have some players that I think are under the radar players coming into the season and was wondering if you've done any work on them. Thanks again and great show. Well, I wanted to keep Ben on for this segment because I know for a fact that he's done a couple of these players. I have not done any of them. So, Ben, I'm going to throw these names to you. Here are the 6 names that Valhalla 24 has thrown at me. We've got Purdue corner Corey Trice, Iowa State pass rusher Will McDonald, Oklahoma State linebacker Malcolm Rodriguez, Arizona State corner Chase Lucas, who I'm pretty sure is like a 9th-year senior, and then 2 Stanford offensive linemen, Walter Rouse and Branson Bragg. So 6 players, Ben, under the radar players. How many of these 6 have you done, and who can you give us some notes on?
Well, I'll go right down the middle here. So I have 3 of them done. Okay. Iowa State defensive end Will McDonald, the linebacker Malcolm Rodriguez out there at Oklahoma State, and Chase Lucas, Arizona State.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with McDonald. What's the book on him?
So McDonald, really interesting player at Iowa State, 6'4", 230, but has only been a rotational player at Iowa State. Why? Because he's very raw, still kind of new to football, still figuring out where to play, but he is just dripping with explosiveness, flexibility, and upside. He was a player of the year in high school in basketball, won the state discus, third in high jump. Fran, this guy won the discus title wearing Chuck Taylor Converses as like a joke. There's video online. Go find it. This guy is a freak athlete. He's strong. I just want to see him play more. But he's really springy. He's quick out of his stance, and he looks the part at 6'4", 230. He really, really could be one of the risers of college football.
I love it. All right, so we'll stay in the Big 12 here. Let's go with Oklahoma State linebacker Malcolm Rodriguez. I know when we were getting ready for the Big 12 preview, you had asked me a couple times if I had done him, and I know Oklahoma State, they've got a couple other guys in that front seven as well. Never made it to Rodriguez, but what have you seen from him on tape?
Well, it's kind of crazy that this trend of former quarterback to linebacker is becoming really popular. We had two last class in Chaz Surratt at North Carolina and Zaven Collins at Tulsa, former quarterbacks. Zaven in high school, Surratt actually played quarterback at North Carolina, but Malcolm Rodriguez was a high school quarterback, a 3-time state champion. He didn't lose a game his final 2 seasons at Wagoner High School, same as Oklahoma State corner Kevin Peterson, if you remember him. Also a standout wrestler. So he was a really tough kid, but he just didn't have the frame to be a quarterback. He's 5'11", 220. So they moved him to safety, which is actually a pretty popular conversion for quarterbacks. So moved him from safety and then to linebacker. Next thing you know, 3-year starter, 2,100 snaps played, over 200 tackles, 2 penalties committed in 2,100 snaps, Fran. He's a smart player. He's a reliable player, just like Chaz Surratt. I don't think he's as explosive and juicy as a Zaven Collins, but he's a guy that can play special teams and is a smart, versatile player.
All right, then last one here, Chase Lucas, who I was obviously joking by saying he's a 9th-year senior, but he is a 6th-year senior, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this guy's been a 4-year starter, 2,500 snaps played. He's got 21 PBUs, 6 interceptions in his career. He's from that prolific Chandler High School out there. I mean, his high school teammate was N'Keal Harry, who's now is in his 3rd year with the Patriots after being a first-round pick, also from Arizona State out there. But he's another guy that's good special teamer. Just need to figure out, do you have enough speed to turn and run out there? Reminds me a little bit of Cam Bynum, who I believe is being kicked around at safety right now. We're in Minnesota with his team in the NFL. Right. But Chase Lucas, very prolific player coming out of high school, was U.S. Army All-American, really experienced player. I kind of think he is what he is at this point. I wanted him to come out last class, but we'll see if, maybe he converts to more of a safety nickel this year. He was a really good running back in high school. He's a tough kid. Just don't know if he has that long speed and the length to really hold up at corner at the next level, but he's tough and a good special teamer, which usually will let you survive just a little bit.
That Arizona State team, they've got a lot of players, so a lot of people are high on, especially
that's a fun team, Fran.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, Merlin Robinson, Evan Fields, Lowell, the defensive tackle, Lole. I got to figure out how to pronounce that at some point this season, but really deep group. On the other side, too, Jaden Daniels out there. You have the really fast running back. I'm blanking on his name right now. Rashad White.
Rashad White, yep.
Veteran offensive line. That's a really fun team out there with Antonio Pierce and Herm Edwards and company.
No question. Well, Ben, thanks for joining us here for Draft Mailbag. Not often that you stick around for the end of the show, but thanks to everybody out there for your continued support of this podcast. Look, if you've got any questions, now's the time. Jump on. College football's here. If you've got a question about specific players or positions or rankings or mock drafts, then now's the time too. If you've got a mock draft, go leave it over in our Apple Podcast section. We will break it down right here on the show each and every week. Thanks so much to everybody out there. We'll catch you next week. We're back here twice weekly right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.